If you're struggling to win in Battlefield's new Battle Royale REDSEC, you're definitely not alone. This is probably one of the most rewarding, but also one of the most challenging Battle Royales that I have seen over the last couple of years. As somebody who has played PUBG massively, as somebody who has played Call of Duty Warzone, Battlefield REDSEC to me ranks right up there in terms of difficulty and in terms of how punishing certain decisions you make in-game can be. But this also results in the biggest smiles possible when you manage to pull off those elusive wins. Now, since its release, I've managed to rack up the most number of wins in the United Kingdom as of making this video. And I also have a win percentage of around 50 to 60% with the boys who I play with in quads, and I think I'm starting to get a really big understanding of the things that can make a massive difference that could greatly improve your chance of getting a win in Battlefield REDSEC. And that's exactly what we're going to do in this video today. I'm going to bestow onto you guys all of the information and all of the things that I'm thinking about in my head in terms of how I get wins in this game to try and secure you your very first win in this game. Not everybody has the crazy amount of hours that I have to play in order to try and rack up wins in this game. And I want to give you guys all of the important lessons I have learned in those hours, all of the crushing defeats and how they came about, and just give you a rundown of the things that I feel are making a massive impact on the overarching success of our games. Before we get into the complexities of things like positioning yourself for a win in the final circle and how to read the circle, I want to talk about just a few fundamental basics that I constantly use in my process of decision making and how I try and guide people in my squad into the best possible positions and the best possible results. And the first big hint I have to people is map scanning. Now, in Battlefield REDSEC, what you see on your minimap, even if you've scaled it up to the maximum in your settings, and what you see in your general surroundings is not that fantastic. But you can, if you open your larger map, get a spot for certain vehicles that are being deployed, vehicle trailers that are being opened, IFVs and tanks that occasionally appear on the map when they fire their weapons. You can also see the density of things like redeploy towers and how many of those towers are being used, and other key information like where loadout drops have started coming in, and also if those loadout drops happen to be limited timed, which have a countdown timer on them indicating that somebody has completed a contract. The same also applies with things like anti-vehicle drops and ammunition drops. All of those are completely visible on the big map, and at the bare minimum can give you a better, more informed indication as to who might be around you, the density of people around you, and just how action-packed certain areas happen to be in this general map. And this is a really big, important factor in terms of background information that you need to make educated decisions on your general rotations. If you're rotating aggressively into locations with lots of loadout drops or recently completed contract rewards or even vehicles, the likelihood is not only are you going to have one team fighting you, you're going to be third-partied by 3 or 4 separate teams. And in fact, I'm seeing the third-party problem become a really big teething issue for lots of new players, because things like loadout drops and things like vehicle trailers that people are fighting over are attracting lots of attention. And in fact, if you can avoid going for those loadout drops as much as humanly possible, or even just getting your own through a limited time contract, I actually think that makes a massive difference compared to going one of the publicly available ones. Lots of people are gravitating towards these, especially if they're in the circle, and I find that they create the most chaos in the game. I find myself very regularly looking at this information to choose a path of least resistance, because the path of least resistance is the one that allows you to be the highest level of aggressor. If you find yourself in a situation where you're dealing with multiple squads at the same time, you get caught in a wash with other teams, and you kind of lose any competitive advantage that you have in whatever position or rotation you happen to have been making. Whereas if you're the person who has got a fairly least resistant path, you haven't really got much company going on around you, you're not worrying about an IFV or a tank creeping up on you, that allows you to make a lot more aggressive snap decisions on the fly, and I think that's really, really critical. The next thing I want to talk about, and is probably the largest mistake I'm seeing probably 95% of players make in REDSEC, is the role of cover and the role of positioning. And specifically, I want to talk about the value of cover and how people are kind of misinterpreting the value of certain things like buildings in Battlefield REDSEC. Now, hilariously, there is actually kind of a genius structure to this, kind of a well thought out process of design that has clearly taken place by the guys who have designed this Battle Royale. The larger structures in the game, like larger buildings, bigger warehouses, happen to be the most defensible in terms of things like tank shells, artillery strikes, airstrikes. But they also are the largest buildings and the least defensible because they have a number of attack angles, multiple entryways, multiple exits, and it's very easy for an entire squad to creep up on some of these larger structures from multiple different angles because maintaining a 360-degree sightline on all of it is very challenging. But on the flip side of that, the smaller, more defensible structures like rooftops on top of skyrises, or even some of the houses that are just available to you that have much better power positions are the most prone to being blown away. Maybe the rooftop doesn't have a huge amount of cover, so if an airstrike comes in you have to jump, or if you're in one of the more residential buildings, they quite literally can be demolished in a single streak. So the actual value of these covers is incredibly fluctuating. The larger buildings in the game have the most health, but are also pretty much non-defendable, and the smaller structures in the game and rooftops and power positions like that are the most defensible, but are the most easily blown away. And this is probably the biggest decision that I make in terms of making rotations, is that I'm not only thinking about my immediate cover, I'm thinking about what happens when that cover gets destroyed. What is the rotation for my team? Where are we going? Where is me and my quad or my duo going to position to if this cover is blown away? And if you've been watching any of my live streams on the road to this general top of leaderboard behavior and trying to rack up all of these wins, you'll regularly see that I'm valuing things like hillsides and cliffs and rock faces with defilades as substantially more valuable cover than anything like a building or a rooftop. And the reason for that is incredibly simple. If you get airstriked on a cliffside that happens to have rocky terrain that you're using for cover, you simply run away and then run back to it. The rocks that are there are still going to be there. The cliffsides and defilades might have taken a small amount of damage and divoting, but for the most part are fairly intact. And the value of that cover is substantially higher positionally than anything else that exists in Battlefield REDSEC. So in terms of my cover ranking, at the very bottom, we have what I would consider to be foliage and bushes, which is essentially just basic concealment. And I don't consider this to be super valuable cover. It ultimately exists to create a visual barrier between me and what rotation I'm making. In the lower tier of that, I also have small buildings and houses, because to me, again, they kind of exist as a one and done. If they get hit, they're pretty much blown away and they're gone. Then I have larger buildings and structures because they can take a bit more of a beating and give me a couple of rotation options in and out of those buildings. And at the very tippity top of my cover list is literally just cliffsides, rock faces, divots and defilades, and the kind of little, spaces that you can operate around where even if someone rains hell on you and you have to move, not only is there an abundance of rotation options because you can create a physical barrier between you and your enemy, but also that barrier will remain even after the airstrike or after the cluster strike has landed. Now, the reason I'm presenting this information now before I talk about things like circle rotations and whether you should be in the middle of the circle or the edge of the circle and how players behave is because this should inform more of your decisions more than anything else in this game. If you have the choice between some residential buildings that look like decent cover or a cliff face with a bunch of rocks, the actual answer in terms of what's more valuable is the cliff face with a bunch of rocks. And even if you do believe you have the best position, you've got the best defilade, the best ditch, the best gully, whatever it so happens to be, you still need to be thinking about what will your immediate rotation out of that be if that position is compromised. And if the answer is that there is absolutely nowhere to rotate to and you're in no man's land, then it probably isn't that good a position. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of it being a mistake that 95% of people are making. The amount of residential buildings in this game, and even just medium structures in this game, that exist on a flat plane of land, that if they are blown away, there is nothing to defend you, is really, really high. So the second a strike comes in, these guys are panicking, they get a guy down or two, then they start panicking some more, and the entire situation devolves in a single streak coming in. My third biggest thing is something that I'm still grappling with myself and something that I'm definitely starting to angle my squad or my duo more towards as this Battle Royale develops, and that is to always be anti-vehicle ready. At the moment, what I see a lot of players doing, and even myself sometimes, is assuming that somebody else is going to take out a vehicle, whereas in reality, most people will view that as an extraneous task or a waste of resources, and won't do that. So if you find yourself coming across an IFV or coming across a tank inside this Battlefield REDSEC Battle Royale, it needs to be something that you yourself are actively ready and available to counter. And in my experience, not only does that mean having an engineer, it also means having somebody else who has a secondary launcher to hit it from multiple angles. Now, there are some strategies for dealing with tanks more effectively, which I'll touch on and talk about a little bit later in this video. But always having anti-vehicle preparations available, always having something like an RPG or a secondary M-Law, I feel is really important in this Battle Royale, and I think can make a massive difference as to whether or not you win a game. Losing a game because you and your squad forgot to bring RPGs or forgot to bring a rocket launcher is not a fantastic way to lose a BR. Let's start talking about things like circle movement, making predictions on end zone, and talking about how you can actually improve your positioning situation in Battlefield REDSEC. Now, one of the early trends I'm noticing in this Battle Royale is the closer you are to the edge of the circle, the more trouble you're in. Now, traditionally in other Battle Royales, especially things like Warzone for example, there's a fine balance between being too central and not being central enough. And whilst that still does apply a little bit in Battlefield REDSEC, I would say that being on the edge of the circle in REDSEC is very, very detrimental to your overall outcome of the game. You want to be in where the circle is heading, or at least near the prediction line, but I don't think you want to be right on the edge of the circle unless completely avoidable. Having watched myself and seen my own gameplay, I'm noticing the more I'm on the edge of the circle, the more I'm running into squads that I don't have the time to deal with, the more I'm being third-partied, and more specifically, the more I'm running into random solos or like a random duo who's left over from a quad, or maybe a trio that's just lagging behind. The third-party factor, I feel, is increasing tenfold the closer I am to the edge of the circle. Now, this also doesn't mean that you want to be directly in the center of the circle where people are heading to, because that also does make you a target if people are looking to transition themselves. The biggest piece of advice I can give you in terms of choosing where to end up positionally is looking at the first initial prediction for where the circle is going to be, and then looking at how aggressively that prediction is moving away from you. So for example, when you open the big map and you see the first prediction come in, and you see the circle starting to collapse, that prediction is going to shrink away from a certain part of the map really fast, or move really slow and steadily. If it's moving really slow and steadily, chances are you are on the side of the map where that zone is actually heading towards, or it's moving very steadily towards a central location. If it's moving really aggressively away from the location or away from the edge of the circle, and you notice that it's shrinking really, really fast, you'll very quickly find to learn that that circle is aggressing far away in a different direction. So again, just to recap, if you see the circle prediction moving very slowly away from you or moving very slowly in a certain direction, depending on what side of the circle you're looking at, chances are it's not going very distantly far away. If you see it shrinking very aggressively, chances are it's pulling very far away very quickly. Because Battlefield REDSEC's circle constantly moves and constantly collapses, this is something you have to keep tabs on in your own time. The circle isn't going to wait around for you to figure it out, and because it's perpetually moving and will kill you instantly, it's something you need to keep tabs on. And if you see that circle moving really fast away from you, then it means your rotation needs to be quicker to avoid those edge of circle third-party situations that I've spoken about. My best advice for final positioning in the circle is reflect what I've spoken about in terms of the value of cover and what cover is better and how buildings aren't always necessarily your friend, and also try to prioritize having a height advantage or a cover advantage in every possible scenario. I'm always looking to take my team away from a low ground, stay on top of the high ground, and keep myself out of open plains and open situations where I don't have a lot of cover. If you can prioritize those things when heading into the final circle, you're going to find yourself in the best positions more often than most other teams available. Adding to this, and something that I feel is quite important, is creating pressure with your duo or your squad in order to facilitate your position even more. You'll see me do this fairly often in my own live streams, where we have a position that I feel is a powerful spot, and in order to make sure that we keep that position for as long as possible, I try to force other squads into each other. Whether that's firing lots of shots over them at distance to break some plates and force them to move away from us, or firing things like a streak, an artillery strike, whatever it so happens to be, to create a buffer between us and them. And again, trying to force squads to funnel into each other, constantly deal damage to them, consistently force them into one another, and move them away from our own power position. This strategy can force third parties, it can force people into each other when they don't want to be fighting each other, and definitely can consolidate a position really well. The only thing you obviously need to be aware of is the more you're firing, the more your position's more noticeable, and the more likely retaliation is likely going to come your way. The next two tips I have are in relation to equipment, and it's something that I feel is super important. The first thing that I would mention is that you honestly don't necessarily need loadout weapons in this game in order to be successful, and carrying upgrade kits around with you and looting them fairly frequently is something that I would highly recommend. A purple SMG, a blue AR, whatever it so happens to be, will suffice in most situations, and forcing yourself into a loadout drop, getting third-partied and getting wiped is substantially worse than just looting around for the equipment that you need. I've had a number of rounds where I've won games and gotten to final circles without so much as even getting a single one of my weapons, because I was constantly carrying around these upgrade kits and upgrading things as I went along to make sure that it wasn't a necessity. And this is especially as important when you're coming back from a redeploy situation and you don't necessarily have a life to risk by going for equipment. And the last note I have on equipment is starting to think about how you can combine strategies, which is something I'm doing very frequently on stream in order to maximize success rates. A good example of this is that as an engineer, the rocket launcher you have once leveled up is capable of immobilizing any armored vehicle for up to 8 seconds, which means I'm primarily aiming for an IFV, hitting the IFV, and getting a squad mate to immediately call in an airstrike or a cluster strike as the impact is made, meaning that that IFV has basically zero chance of living and they have to abandon the vehicle. Another good example of this that I've started utilizing lately is having 3 players in my squad aggress a position whilst using a recon drone to not only gather intelligence as to where the guys are rotating to, but also utilizing the fact that the drone itself has its own ordinances that it can use to deal combat damage too, meaning that you can harass somebody from the sky and know how they're leaving and rotating to and from positions, whether or not they're pushing you, whilst also having the ability to deal damage and have other squad mates push them as well. These class play dynamics and combinations are really important in REDSEC and can give you some serious success rates very early on. So folks, I hope this video has been incredibly useful. I hope it's given you an insight into how I'm managing to nail the wins that I've won so far and how I'm working together as a unit. Now, obviously, working with randoms in REDSEC is incredibly challenging, and I am putting together a Discord soon so that people can find communicative REDSEC squads to start getting some wins together as groups. And I will drop a comment with a link in the description below as to when that will be available. As of uploading this video, it won't be available right away, but I promise you it is in the pipeline. And once it is available, it will be here on the channel. I really appreciate you guys watching. I hope you drop a sub as well. We're really close to 200k, which I'm trying to hit before the end of 2025. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next one.